Hello students, this is Mrs. Lee. I will be reading the short story, The Devil and Daniel Webster, originally written during the Great Depression by Stephen Vincent Benet and published in the magazine, The Saturday Evening Post. I hope you enjoy this short story. It was written in 5 segments. I will begin by reading the first segment, and you will read each segment separately. While reading this first segment, think about what is motivating the characters. Obviously, you're going to be introduced to the 3 main characters in the beginning, but you're really going to more see the motivation behind Jebus Stone's decision. And of course, one might think we already know the motivation behind the devil's decision. But as we go throughout the short story, we'll be able to see Daniel Webster and what could possibly motivate the decisions he makes in what he does every day. So our main skill that we're going to analyze is character motivation. But we're not going to disregard the great use of figurative language and vocabulary usage in this short story. I will begin reading the text now. The Devil and Daniel Webster, Part 1. It's a story they tell in the border country where Massachusetts joins Vermont and New Hampshire. Yes, Daniel Webster's dead, or at least they buried him. But every time there's a thunderstorm around Marshfield, they say you can hear his rolling voice in the hollows of the sky. And they say that if you go to his grave and speak loud and clear, Daniel Webster, Daniel Webster, the ground will begin to shiver and the trees begin to shake. And after a while, you'll hear a deep voice saying, "Neighbor, how stands the Union?" Then you better answer, "The Union stands as she stood, rock bottom and copper sheath, one and indivisible, or he's liable to rear right out of the ground." At least that's what I was told when I was younger. You see, for a while he was the biggest man in the country. He never got to be president, but he was the biggest man. There were thousands that trusted in him, right next to God Almighty, and they told stories about him and all the things that belonged to him that were like the stories of patriarchs and such. They said he stood up to speak. Stars and stripes came right out in the sky, and once he spoke against a river and made it sink into the ground. They said when he walked the woods with his fishing rod, kill-all, the trout would jump out of the streams right into his pockets, for they knew it was no use putting up a fight against him. And when he argued a case, he could turn on the harps of the blessed and the shaking of the earth underground. That was the kind of man he was. And his big farm up in Marshfield was suitable to him. The chickens he raised were all white meat down through the drumsticks. The cows were tended like children. And the big ram he called Goliath had horns with a curl like a morning glory vine, and could butt through an iron door. But Daniel wasn't one of your gentlemen farmers. He knew all the ways of the land, and he'd be up by candlelight to see that the chores got done. A man with a mouth like a mastiff, and a mastiff is a bulldog. A brow like a mountain, and eyes like burning anthracite. That's like burning coal. That was Daniel Webster in his prime, and the biggest case he argued never got written down in the books, for he argued it against the devil. Nip and tuck and no holds barred. And this is the way I used to hear it told. I love this beginning, this bigger-than-life Daniel Webster, this hyperbole, this tall tale of this man who could do no wrong, and everything that he did was absolutely great. Obviously, great use of hyperbole in that section, as well as a wonderful use of simile. Let's start where the story actually begins, with the next section. There was a man named Jebus Stone, lived at Cross Corners, New Hampshire. He wasn't a bad man to start with, But he was an unlucky man. If he planted corn, he got borers. If he planted potatoes, he got blight. He had good enough land, but it didn't prosper him. He had a decent wife and children, but the more children he had, the less there was to feed them. If stones cropped up in his neighbor's field, boulders boiled up in his. If a horse with the spavins, if he had a horse with the spavins, he'd trade it for one with the staggers and give something extra. There's some folks bound to be like that, apparently. But one day, Jebustone got sick of the whole business. So obviously, we can see Jebustone, it says it in the text, he's extremely unlucky. Things just do not go his way. So we're starting to see a pattern that could drive Jebustone into certain decisions, whether it's the right path or whether he sells himself out. Does that remind you of any text we've read recently? Let's look at the next chunk of text. We know Jebustone is tired of his unlucky life. He'd been plowing that morning, and he had just broke the plowshare on a rock that he could have sworn hadn't been there yesterday. And as he stood looking at the plowshare, the off horse began to cough, that ropey kind of cough that means sickness and horse doctors. There were 2 children down with the measles. His wife was ailing, and he had a whitlow on his thumb. It was about the last straw for Jebustone. "I vow," he said, and he looked around him kind of desperate. "I vow it's enough to make a man want to sell his soul to the devil, and I would for 2 cents. Then he felt a kind of queerness come over him at having said what he had said. Though naturally, being a New Hampshireman, he wouldn't take it back. But all the same, when it got to be evening, and as far as he could see, no notice had been taken, he felt relieved in his mind, for he was a religious man. But notice is always taken sooner or later, just like the good book says. And sure enough, next day, about supper time, a soft-spoken, dark-dressed stranger drove up in a handsome buggy and asked for Jebustone. Wow, who could that handsome stranger be? Well, Jebus told his family it was a lawyer, come to see him about a legacy, but he knew who it was. He didn't like the looks of the stranger, nor the way he smiled with his teeth. They were white teeth and plentiful. Some say they were filed to a point, but I wouldn't vouch for that. And he didn't like it when the dog took one look at the stranger and ran away howling with his tail between his legs. But having passed his word, more or less, he stuck to it, and they went out behind the barn and made their bargain. Jebustone had to prick his finger to sign, and the stranger lent him a silver pen. The wound healed clean, but it left a little white scar. This is the end of part 1. And the encounter of Jebustone and none other than the devil. I want you to think about Jebustone and what motivated Jebustone to make this decision to sell his soul to the devil.